So our second speaker for the evening is going to be Dr. Aprille Ericsson. Dr. Aprille Ericsson has held numerous positions during her 27-plus year tenure with NASA. In 2017, Dr. Aprille Ericsson assumed the position of new business lead for the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, Instrument Systems and Technology Division. Formerly, she served as the deputy to the chief technologist for the Engineering and Technology Directorate with a focus on CubeSat and SmallSat mission development. She has also served at NASA HQs as a program executive for the Earth Science and a business executive for the Space Science. Some of the most prestigious awards that she's had are from the Western Society of Engineers, the 2016 Washington Award, and the Engineering Honor Society. Tau Beta Pi, distinguished alumnus. She is proud to be the first African-American female to receive a PhD in mechanical engineering from Howard University, the first American to receive a PhD in mechanical engineering, the first American female to receive a PhD in mechanical engineering, and the aerospace option from HU, and the first African-American female to receive a PhD in engineering at NASA Goddard Space Center. And so I have the high honor of presenting Dr. Ericsson. I actually, on a personal note, remember Dr. Ericsson. We both were at Howard University at the same time, and I remember her working on her PhD while she was at Howard. And I will say that watching her go through that was part of the motivation that got me to the point where I eventually got my doctorate. So thank you for that motivation, Dr. Ericsson. The next voice that you're going to hear is Dr. Aprille Ericsson.
Oh, thank you so much for that great introduction. And I should say, Leonard, I'm actually an MIT alum. So I share something with both of you guys on the screen at the moment. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully this will work seamlessly. Okay, so thank you for having me today. This is the first time I've had the opportunity to interact with the Association for Computing Machinery, but I thank you for making the time to listen to my talk. I just wanted to highlight that when Jeff asked me, it actually happens that I'm also the top recipient. I received the top award from the American Society of Mechanical Engineers this year. It's called the Ralph Coates Rowe Award. And I like to say it comes with a little ching ching and a little bling bling. So us federal employees don't always get to accept monetary awards, but I'll be able to accept this one. As a result, my dance card is quite full. And so I decided that this might be actually something you guys would be interested in hearing. And then if we have time at the end, I'll talk a little bit about Lunarnet, which is the envisioned internet for lunar space, you know, to probably coincide with the Artemis program. So one of the things that really touched me about this time that we're going through, and when things are difficult, I look for inspiration. Considering it's Black History Month, I figured it'd take a moment to really celebrate our past. As John F. Kennedy says here, we celebrate the past to awaken the future. For me, as a young lady, and I see my, yeah, there we go. The things that inspired me were the Apollo missions. You know, I was this first grader that was very fortunate that a parent brought a TV to the school so that we could all crowd around this little black and white TV. Yeah, I'm dating myself. And I was really, truly inspired by the space program. I must say at that time, I thought that the astronauts were pretty old, because to a sixth grader, men in their 30s seemed pretty old. I quickly did that math, right? And then I figured out how old they were, and we all were kind of saying, well, gee, you know, I hope I don't have to be that old. I'm going to be much younger. And I have applied to the astronaut program, but there were things actually medically that held me back from getting selected. And since we are talking about computing, I said, what not better than to highlight one of my former mentors and a hero for me, which was described as a hidden figure in that very infamous movie that we so loved, many of us love to see, Katherine G. Johnson, and G is for Goebel. I love to talk about the fact that she was a math teacher first from West Virginia, and she was able to solve orbital navigation equations for Gemini and Apollo missions. And she is really all about computer science, right? Because the things that she was doing at the time, the women were labeled human computers. And so I thought this was just most appropriate to highlight someone like her for your meeting. I will note that the night that she was receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom from President Barack Obama, we were supposed to get together, but it had been such a long day for her. And her daughter, Joelle, and I still maintain contact with Joelle, and I discussed it, and we just thought it would be too much to try to bring the family over. So I didn't get to see her that day, but I'm just always so proud of the things that she was able to contribute. So with COVID, I think a lot of us have been very determined, and I say, grit, even in the face of failure, but, with COVID, we could not fail. I think of myself as a kid, this little brown girl who grew up in the projects in Brooklyn, New York, and I was a tom girl. As you can see, don't I look a little rough and tough here? Got the little baseball bat going on, and believe it or not, even though my mother argued for me to be on the baseball team, I never got to play. I sat on the bench and watched, and the same thing happened with basketball because it just didn't let girls do that kind of stuff. But I was one of those kids that was determined. And so there you go. You can see me playing all kinds of sports. I'm actually an athlete, and I'm an aging athlete. But even as recent as this past year, I was awarded MVP for Washington, D.C. co-ed softball champs. I believe that, there's a lot to be said with learning how to work with men. And so sports did that for me, and it allowed me to really continue to have that grit to succeed in the face of the fact that I'm in a field that is dominated by men. I did graduate from MIT the year of the shuttle disaster, and it really made me decide on what path I would take for the future. And I think it did the same thing. There was a bit of reckoning at that moment of what we were going to do with our space program after the first shuttle disaster. For myself, I really didn't want to work in missile defense, and I was extremely interested in manned spaceflight. But as I mentioned at that time, after a failure like that, we were actually in a holding pattern for manned spaceflight. So I began to think about what other areas I could apply my aerospace knowledge to. And as you can see, I've been very successful with multiple appointments. Not only have I been a full practicing engineer at Goddard, I've been a professor at Bowie State, Howard University, and University of Maryland. I also have taught at a middle school. I used to teach aerospace club at middle school, and I run a NSBE Junior chapter. You'll hear about that, NSBE, National Society of Black Engineers. So I really think I'm a well-rounded engineer, technologist. My current title is New Business Lead for the Instrument Systems and Technology Division. I was a project manager for a number of missions, program manager, and I used to run the SBIR program at Goddard as well. So I've done quite a number of different things. And in terms of my personality, I had to be somewhat competitive. And I always say to people that are not quite like myself, don't hate the game, change the game, innovate, and be a risk taker. And for me to step out of my comfort zone and to be an engineer, a professor, a manager, and then a mom, really because that I call it STEAM girl magic. And I really believe that could have something to contribute. And I think that everyone does to the things that we're trying to solve here. So remember that there is always a higher calling, contribute to something bigger. And I love the statement by John F. Kennedy, which kind of gets me into the mood for what I'm going to talk about. But together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths, and encourage the arts and commerce. And so I don't just say STEM when I go out to talk to kids. A lot of times I talk about STEAM. And as you can see, he's wrapped that all up into his statement. Lastly, as the Instrument Systems and Technology Division new business person, it's very different from the typical new business business that we think from a industry perspective. You know, working for the government, it's really about finding partnerships, working proposals, new technology, infusing that technology, and finding ways to collaborate with universities, academia, and industry. So if any of you are interested in collaborating with Goddard, and particularly with our instrument technology, then I'm the person to come to, and we can definitely talk and chat about how we can collaborate. So I'm thinking that many of you are familiar with Goddard, and one of the things that we lead in is really the discussion of earth science and how our earth and the climate around us is changing. I was very fortunate to work on not only ISAT-1 as a program exec, but later as the instrument manager for ISAT-2, which was, you know, a $500 million instrument on a $1 billion project mission. So it was something that I felt near and dear to my heart because, you know, we have to solve these really big problems of climate change, and this allows us to really have the scrutiny and level of data to the resolution of 3 centimeters. We're able to measure many of the with laser LiDAR technology. One of my favorite missions, Lola, was able to really be that advancement of that technology. And then ISAT takes it a step further with, you know, the 6 beams, 3 tracks, 6 beams, and capable of not only measuring the glaciers, but also measuring sea ice and below the surface as well. So as we begin to think about the impacts and how we solve these problems, it really takes investigation of scientists all over the world, which really begins to talk about collaboration and working together. As it's already been said by John F. Kennedy, you know, we really do have to work together, and COVID really forced us into that thought pattern because everybody in this entire world was quickly affected by COVID. But the one thing that was so inspirational is how we came together, how we come up with a global solution. And the White House Chief of Staff here has this comment, global solution to COVID insight. We sink or we swim together. And I wish so often that we can put our differences aside and work together. I think it's so important for the future. One of my statements that I like to say often is when diverse ideas collide, they spark innovation. I think about this book that was written that talks about how a gentleman reflected on the 6 major inventions across time. And believe it or not, he identified something as simple as tea and coffee houses. And why? Because at the time when the London first tea house was developed, it allowed people to have a beverage, sit down together and talk and chat from all walks of life. They no longer needed to be inebriated to safely drink a beverage. They could drink a hot beverage and chit chat about things that would not normally occur in their daily lives. So I say to you to think about how you can have those incidental moments to discuss and collide and come up with some synergistic idea from the differences that you both possess. When you look at the face of industry, I love how they are promoting diverse teams, you know, helping to identify leaderships from wherever. And it's very important to have that welcoming environment. If we're going to be able to solve problems through innovation, you really must have the ability to look at the problem from various different ways. I've been very fortunate that, you know, being a manager, as well as being an engineer, but also having an artistic side, it has allowed me to really approach problems, but also to see through someone else's eyes what they're thinking as they begin to explain and how that actually can mesh with the ideas that we have. So the virtual disruption, the things that have changed across all of our lives, you know, social, work, school. For many of us, we've we're really meeting virtual. We're like this, we've got a hybrid meeting going on here. What's been phenomenal with watching my daughter is that her trying to do math without a pen, pencil, or paper. I'm like, kid, how are you gonna do it? How are you gonna do algebra 1 and geometry without a piece of paper and a pencil? But we're figuring it out. All of the things that have now been sort of the societal norms of what we do and what we take to work have really changed. And it's really required us to think out the box. How do we make things fun and exciting and interesting on this 2-dimensional platform that you're seeing right before you tonight? So for me, even for my family, we started off with a virtual holiday party, right? And we were able to bring so many more of us together across the country. And then the same thing happened in my job, right? So there I am with the team at the time, and we had a virtual party for our teams, really trying to also connect with people's, humanitarian side and having fun and feeling connected. And then the virtual environment really strove to make change across the education platform. It really required new approaches to teaching. It changed how class time was spent. Students had to really own their own progress, very challenging for younger students. MIT did some really great things. I sit on a board at MIT, and we discussed how they were really making intentional learning group assignments for students. In the past, when you were at MIT, you typically, would meet your classmates in class, but now they were really making sort of assignments to make sure that students were able to collaborate and talk together and to get that added support from each other. And then even things like college recruitment as well as employment recruitment have changed. We're using a lot more of interviewing platforms and a virtual platform as well. And by the way, of course, all of this occurs because we've got great computer scientists or programmers that are able to create these platforms for us. For an organization like American Society of Mechanical Engineers, they really went to this EFES, digital learning. They were able to actually service more students across the various countries. And then they began to collaborate with governmental agencies and nonprofits to start to gather their manufacturing capabilities, the 3D printing capabilities that could be utilized by healthcare or others, and to create this exchange network. And then this last bullet here about, ASME learning from home, really creating a series of e-learning courses. Now, this had already been happening. MIT was actually one of the leaders in putting their curriculum out there in an e-format, but this became more prevalent not only at university levels, but here we're talking about a professional society who began to really create this coursework and availability to their members. So another thing that occurred at MIT was they began to research and discuss how they in the past had provided these online courses, but they also realized that they could not necessarily be the one that honchos the platform that would make it accessible and make it more palatable for people to use. So they did something unusual. They actually sold the particular part of edX. They became a public benefit company, and they generously turned that money back to a nonprofit, $800 million, to actually help to strengthen the impact of digital learning. And that was, a phenomenal step forward, but that was also one of their real focus for MIT and Harvard was to overcome persistent inequities in online teaching and to make it accessible to others. For myself, I was in the middle of running a in-person NSBE Junior chapter, and we won PCI chapter of the year the previous year, and then all of a sudden things had to change. We have a code academy with Microsoft, and we had to pivot really quickly to this virtual presence. And so the challenges were numerous for so many of us. How do we remain engaged? How do students remain engaged? How do we all continue to innovate and learn in challenging environments? And this is my girl code team who eventually did so well considering this environment. And I should have probably let it say, because they call themselves Girl Code, which I thought was pretty relevant to the discussion here. But my girls are coding in FIRST Robotics, and they were actually able to take the NESB National Championship. They competed in Greece and won awards in Greece. And so I say to adults, like, if the kids could do it, which we all know that kids are extremely tolerant and resilient, but if they can do it, we could too. So the successes during COVID-19 for NASA have been numerous. You know, I'll start off with, again, you know, international partnerships are essential. And you could see that flavor again of us coming together. You know, in the past, we had started off with, you know, very old and long ago, talking about, you know, Mercury 13, in this case, women that were secretly trained. And now we're getting ready to, they did not end up going, this group did not end up going in space, but now we're talking about the Artemis program, and NASA will land, is planning on landing the first woman and the first person of color onto the moon's surface. And many of us are very excited about that, but it is really NASA pivoting also to collaborate with our commercial and international partners. We really want to see a sustainable opportunity for exploration to really grow in the future. And I'm so glad that they boldly took this challenge of, you know, really diversifying the pool of candidates that have been on the surface of the moon. And if we have time, I'll come back to Artemis program later. The other thing that we saw that was really a big stride forward was we began to see astronauts fly on commercial space vehicles. So here you see the SpaceX Crew 1 vehicle, and then it quickly pivoted to, you know, pretty much all private citizens commercial vehicle. I'll call the Inspiration Crew vehicle for 4. And I believe I heard our previous speaker talking about the billionaires in the current industry. Well, here you go. This second flight was financed, and a number of people on that second crew were paid for by, you know, a billionaire. So again, space is for everyone, and wanted to highlight this student-run effort, which is about collecting messages around the world using nanotechnology. They actually etch onto a dish. And that dish will be sent to the International Space Station. It's called the Humans Project, and it's a chance for anyone to send a message into space. So I would say there is enough space for everyone. Some other things that have been really successful, you know, we have Helios Physics with Hermes and Solaris. Those are some missions. Earth Science, we have the SWISAR, which is an instrument on board of the aircraft you see. And then IceCube is a little small CubeSat that was launched and able to get some phenomenal results regarding the ice formation and clouds and things like that. For astrophysics, you guys have probably been following fairly closely the James Webb Space Telescope, which launched back the day before Christmas. And it is now 1.5 million kilometers away. It's parked in its orbit, and it's fully deployed. All of the mechanisms, I mean, it's just been performing so wonderfully. We're all just tickled pink. And I was fortunate to be the near spec infrared detector manager for some time. But the opportunity to see way back into time and to see the things that we have not been traditionally able to really see them in a timely manner is just phenomenal. We've already started to get data and pictures, and it's just a wonderful thing. And then we've got here Dragonfly, which is actually, Dragonfly is actually a mission that we are partnering with Aprille with, but it's a nuclear drone that we're going to have on a Martian surface, and it's an opportunity to explore in a different way. So for exploration for our robotics, we've continued to explore and to grow from some of the previous missions to Perseverance. And some of the things that were unique about Perseverance was that we actually carried 2 microphones on that device, on that robot. And it there's a moment here that you can actually hear a helicopter flying. It may be a little difficulty, but ingenuity is also part of that package deal. And so we now have another craft, not just a rover, but a helicopter flying on Mars. And then one of the biggest awesome type of if you're into orbital mechanics, maneuvering to actually land on Bennu, an asteroid, and to actually do what we call the tag, which is a touch and go. So we're able to actually touch down on the surface of Bennu, not just touch, but also collect samples into a vacuum-like apparatus, and it's now on its way back from rendezvousing with Bennu. So really cool stuff. And you can see everybody's really happy. So that's OSIRIS-REx. So some other successes during COVID, and remember I was at the time was talking about mechanical engineering, but ironically, many of these successes that I highlight are about data and about computing. And so you can see here this tunneler, which is it's a huge machine that does the tunneling to make break ground and do the large tunnels that we often really don't pay much attention to, but they're done with the TBMs that are showing autonomously. And so one of the things that was done was actually they were able to successfully break ground with one of these huge tunneling mechanisms using an autonomous system, which had not been done before. This the solution for it was an in-house tunnel insight solution, and it automatically generates predictive and prescriptive analytics and insights, really to help reduce any damage to the machinery, but also to hopefully predict unforeseen incidents that could occur. And so you can see there with the brain and then machine learning, and then they've got the database. And so again, what we're starting to see too is really autonomy, artificial intelligence, and being integrated into various levels of our life. This particular one is showing an innovative development that was funded by the Department of Energy. It's a almost $5.2 million grant that actually helps with the maintenance and predictive maintenance of nuclear power plants. And so this machine learning driven predictive maintenance could actually help with cost savings, but also help from potentially any damage to the machinery, which, of course, reduces time down. But they're using physics-based modeling in this machine learning predictive component. And so it allows us to have a flow loop that actually, when actually the experimental flow loop that would use to emulate the cooling of this molten salt reactor. And then that way they can predict the performance in a way to actually avoid any failures. So I love the opportunity to look at new ways to apply 3D printing. My graduate degrees are in mechanical engineering, and one of the things that we don't often get to play with as much in the space environment was 3D printers. It's actually slowly coming along because of the homogeneity of the material. You need to really make sure that you have that when you're looking at structures that potentially could fail in space. And so that has been slowly a thing that we've been utilizing across time. Close that door, Ariel. And so this gentleman here is actually able to print with the identification, looking at a lobster shell. He actually identified that lobster shells are not just this one thin sort of covered shell, it's actually multi-layered, thousands of little minuscule layers. And so he used that structure to actually begin to create his own 3D printed concrete. And the innovation here was that he was using these tiny stretchable nanofibers inside the substance and then stack them similar to how you would see them in a lobster shell. And this was done out of the Australian, he's a researcher in Melbourne, Australia. So moving again into the additive manufacturing and some of the other things that I think many of us had saw the industry overwhelmingly coming together. I saw small businesses and large businesses coming together to help with the supply chain of ventilators and masks for anyone in the healthcare industry. And so here I'm showing, not a matter of fact, not only were it the shields, but also swabs, because there was really a growing shortage quickly for many of us that were trying to find these supplies, even for our households, but also for the hospitals. And then down at the bottom, it's actually showing some of the respirator designs that were created by the Czech Institute of Informatics and Robotics and Cybernetics. One of the things that HP did was they actually brought together communities to create a repository for these 3D files so that people could share them across the various industries. Again, the collaboration was just overwhelming during this period. The other driving factor was not only to be able to protect ourselves with coverings or to be able to, take lab tests, but then of course the disinfecting of environments and surfaces. And so these two particular devices we're showing here, and an autonomous disinfecting robot, which has the UV light that allows you to actually kill the microbes, 99.9% effective. This particular device was actually developed here in the United States by Blue Ocean Robotics. And then many of us don't realize too that the HVAC filter systems also were a big concern that, could the virus reside in those filters? And so this particular company actually designed a heated nickel foam air filter that would work at 99.8% efficiency, proven to kill COVID and to, of course, reduce any other pathogens, airborne pathogens in residential or commercial areas. And then one other autonomous robot here, which, I would love to not have to get in my car and go out and get groceries and things like this, but this was a robot that would deliver groceries and parcels within a 3-mile radius. And again, just really helping to reduce the transmission. And the last one here on the right is really about guarding the gate. So I actually use this with my NSBE Junior students. When they come in the door, they stand up to this little facial recognition thing. It's actually just looking for a face, and then it measures temperature. It actually also checks to see if you have your mask on. The kids love it, of course, but I love it for a different reason, to make sure that none of the kids are coming in with fevers or making sure that they're wearing their masks. So as we kind of move forward into the future, of course, I love to talk about how we really need to be inclusive and working together. Currently, young students, they're in classes where their classmates are extremely diverse in culturally, in complexion, in capabilities, in terms of homes. So they're becoming used to it. And we as adults need to understand that this is the way of the future, and we need to as well. I reflect on the things that I learned and the things that I watched as a child. I was really big into watching Star Trek. And many of us don't realize from, this early generation of Star Trek, how diverse this crew was, and that this was a vision that Carl Sagan talks about in terms of, somewhere something incredible is waiting to be known. But, the producer at this time was really planting that seed that germinated over time to really understand that we could all work together. I believe that we all should be touching the future, inspiring the next generation, and hopefully the things that you're seeing here are inspirational to you, the things that we're able to collaborate. And for my colleague there who's from Howard, there you see me, I was actually on the board of trustees at the time, but I was able to then pivot and make a relationship with Oprah Winfrey and visit her school in South Africa, and to listen to women engineers who are striving to make change in their communities where they've not always been embraced, but how can you leave out 50% of the population, I asked. So things that you might think about as you want to move forward into really helping your communities, think about the rules of engagement. I must say that when I was asked yesterday during a fireside chat, one of the things that I think most highly about, and I say integrity and honesty is truly one of the highest things in terms of values that I find for my teams. Transparency is really important. I'm going to ask Jeff, how are we doing on time? Jeff, are you there?
Sorry, I don't move as fast as I used to.
Okay.
Yeah, we got about a few minutes and then about 5 minutes for questions. So if you can, maybe about 2 or 3 more minutes, and then we'll get some questions.
All right, I'm going to pull up quickly another chart I want to show colleagues here. Wow, I lost my screen. There it is. Can you guys see your screen right now? Jeff, are you seeing this? And you're probably saying, I don't move as quickly as I did, right?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, this is a snapshot of that was taken in 2019, and I wanted to show people that there are definitely places for people to collaborate with us at Goddard. Right now, it's estimated about $2 billion, the contributions for exploration. And I know that excites people quite a bit. I'm gonna move back just a little bit to the Lunarnet conversation. So some of the things that Goddard has been weighing heavily on is, we talked about really about a woman being in space. And so we do want to see that as the future. You can see that the communication that's necessary, the cross communication that's necessary if we're going to be able to inhabit the moon. This is showing like this is supposed to be a 4D type resolution type picture of her booth. And then being able to communicate with students across the world. And you can see here, when we're able to communicate, even be able to communicate in caverns beneath the surface of the moon. And then how do we do this? Well, we've been building up capabilities and technologies. And if many of you know that a large percentage of our workforce at Goddard are contractors. So we work very closely with industry, but we've been working on enabling technologies like robotic refueling missions and specialized tools and robots, as you've seen and heard, and avionics, and even fluid transfer and cryogenic fluid transfer, because if we were to have to refuel, it's typically going to be with a very cold fuel. So cryogenic fueling is going to be very important in the future. Of course, assembling in space, which is something I studied when I was at MIT, and how do we do that? How do we train people to do that in a safe manner? Manufacturing and mining. So space communication is big, and it was great to hear Leonard mention quantum communications, and Goddard is actually working in that area. So anybody that's got something or wish or interested in that. And if you are in private industry, particularly small businesses, we do have a spot in the call for small businesses, which includes quantum-like techniques, quantum communication, and quantum timing sensitive instrumentation. We will learn from all of the things that we've been doing with earth science as well as space weather. And so it's very important for us to understand the atmosphere from the sun. As we kind of move out, we have to be able to understand that environment to be able to be predictive and to do space weathering modeling. And so that's an extremely important area and characteristic, we believe, for the future of our ability to travel in space. The CCMC, just if you want to know, for your own information, Community Coordinated Modeling Center. So that's actually where we do a lot of this. And this knowledge would then be in conjunction with our Lunar Net Communications network to help us to predict any disturbances or to communicate directly to the Earth or the moon's surface rather, that something like a solar flare is occurring. And so we envision that, you know, astronauts would either have handheld devices, wrist devices or whatever, but they would be able to be warned if say a solar flare, you know, emitting the CMEs, as we know, from the and radiation from the environment of the sun. Of course, understanding, I've already mentioned ISAT, JEDI is another mission, really understanding the ability to study the Earth, which leads us to really being able to have a sustained presence on the moon and Mars. And then looking at our planetary science contributions, you know, we've gained after decades of, you know, research on other bodies, planetary bodies, now to really explore and to go back and analyze like chemical constituents on Mars, let's say the SAM instrument, or how we have to have plans to even do more with our MoMA instruments. And then I already mentioned the recently selected Dragonfly mission. Well, actually, I guess it's over a year now, but that will actually assess microbial habitability and the prebiotic chemistry at various locations on Titan, so on the Titan moon. We've had numerous selections for many other instruments on the surface, looking particularly at lunar volatiles, looking at regoliths and the trace economic resources, which of course is for the manufacturing. And then, as you can see, laser and lunar environment monitoring station, those will all be very helpful for in situ measurements right there on the ground. For people that are interested in actually applying to these things for like Artemis, there is a program called NASA's Commercial Lunar Payload Services Project. And so you can apply with your own proposals to enhance the capabilities and to fill the gaps that we see for the Artemis program. Wallops, of course, is our only agency NASA-owned test launch range. So it's actually the opportunity and ability to launch from the East Coast, and it allows us to have access to space for exploration, development, and demonstrations, maturity of science and mission-related technologies. Wallops actually has a launch range. Its fixed ground station assets are in Virginia and Bermuda, and so we see these being used for human exploration in the future as well. Emerging technologies, of course, there are many, but 3D printed electronics on the nanoscale. We've got integrated photonics, and you can see a very small exoplanet spectrograph can be developed. We've got teraflop computing and terabit communications, quantum technologies I've mentioned before, but I did not mention we also have a collaboration with an SBIR company, which is an atomic interferometer gravity gradient instrument. So it's space-based quantum sensing, and then artificial attention and machine learning to help us with looking at things like with our MODIS instrument, potentially predicting or seeing forest fires in a way that we hadn't in the past. So this brings me back to this chart here, and I'm ready to close, but we really see that there are opportunities for people to collaborate with us in so many ways as we step forward into back into the moon race, so Maryland to the moon, and we hope that you guys are interested in collaborating with us in the future. So Jeff, I will end on that note.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ericsson. Thank you for such a interesting, insightful, informative talk. We have a few questions that we'd like to direct to you from the chat. One question that we have is, do you think that NASA is prepared from a technical perspective for long-term moon and Mars missions? What are your thoughts on long-term moon and Mars missions from NASA's perspectives?
We have the ability to get there, right? It's the long duration that we're building up that capability. I love the movie The Martian, right? Because it really does an excellent job of really a lot of the challenges that one would experience in long-term duration flight on a Martian surface. However, there are definitely some kinks to be worked out. And NASA has one of the challenges is not really so much the technical, but it's really about money. it's going to take quite a large sum of money to get us there, to create these platforms to launch from. So, ISS is one, but, we would see ourselves launching midstream from some other platform to get us, further out into space easier, not launching off of the surface. And then, of course, to begin to set up a permanent base on the moon will have, other challenges. But I do think that a larger part about it is finances.
Sure. We've got time for one more question, and that's how do you see the new technology that you mentioned and the new ways of thinking and operating in COVID? How do you see those continue to be used once we come out of COVID and get back to a face-to-face?
So I think COVID has changed us forever, right? We're probably not, any of us, likely to go back to exactly how we were before this. I was having a conversation with my boss that, he's like, yeah, your job, yes, you need to be here, but yes, you don't need to be here. So I'm already talking about having that hybrid approach of doing less time at work, physically in the building, but more time away, which actually has a different type of effect. Sometimes a non-intentional effect of not being able to communicate as easily. And it sometimes is just easier to communicate with people in the room. In terms of the future, I think it actually shows that how when we all work together, we can actually come up with solutions quite more quickly, in an extreme situation. If there's something dire, we were able to, all rush forward, jump in there, and to be able to solve these problems. And I think that hopefully we'll see a lot more of that type of collaboration in the future. I think that people don't realize that NASA does communicate. And I saw a question in here about how much are we collaborating with other countries? As I showed the International Space Station as an example, 17 different countries worked and collaborated on that. Now, some engineers would say, yeah, it was harder because of it, but we also realize things like that take a lot of money and a lot of energy. So James Webb is another very successful collaboration. European Space Agency was, our huge partner in that. We often partner with the Japanese as well as Canada. I'm extending my reach into South America. I've also been, having conversations with South Africa with their, sort of junior space agency. They're probably one of the more junior. And so I do see that COVID has brought us together in a way that is different. And the nice thing is that I don't have to go into a large conference room with a bit set up to be able to talk to my colleagues on the other side of the world with my own computer.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you, Dr. Ericsson, for that talk. Quick round of applause.
Thank you.
And also in recognition of your talk, we're going to be presenting you with this virtual plaque tonight that you'll get physically, which reads that ACM Baltimore chapter extends our appreciation to you, Dr. Aprille Ericsson, for delivering one of the inaugural invited talks at our kickoff meeting, the ACM Baltimore chapter inaugural seminar 2022, Laurel, Maryland, February 24th, 2022.